Today I'm excited to bring you Omozua Isiramen to Titans of Transition. Omoszua is an executive life coach, high-performance brain trainer, and neuro agility expert. Where do you come from? Let's take a minute.
My parents are Nigerian. I was born in Wales.
I love it.
Yes, I was born in Newport, Wales, Gwent. I schooled in London for a while. My parents moved to Germany, and then at some point my parents went back to Nigeria. And the Nigerian parents that they were, that generation, what they did was that they would send their children to Europe or the States to study, get a good education. And that's how I landed back in Europe.
And you're in Luxembourg, right?
Today I'm in Luxembourg, the heart of Europe.
There you go.
And close to everything.
Hey, Omoszua, welcome to Titans of Transition podcast this morning.
I am happy to be here. Thank you very much, Joe.
And I'm very excited too. And thank you in particular for reaching out to me on LinkedIn. I know you happened to catch one of my recent episodes.
Yes.
And we had a little dialogue going back and forth. We're both coaches.
Yes.
So we have very common interests. But you have a specialization that I think is really helpful for those who are anticipating a transition in their career, in their life, or in the midst of a transition, or even after a transition to optimize for the best for their lives. And that specialization has to do with the brain and mindset and so many other things that I know many people might have heard a little bit about, but it's so important to understand these concepts to be adept in making a positive transition. And so I think you just bring a ton to the table here. But in addition to having that kind of conversation, I would also like to hear about your personal transition. And let's start with that. How did you arrive at doing what you're doing today and this very useful coaching focus that we can all benefit from?
Yeah, I would say back when I was around 19, actually, I lost my mother. And I was in Europe when she died, so I wasn't even able to go to her funeral and anything. And I remember back then when we got the news that she had passed, that we were told not to cry. We've got to be strong. Yeah, life has to go on. And that was a moment back then I didn't understand it. And of course, you're 19. My younger sister was 11. And so you feel that's what you should do. You never know how that impacts you for the rest of your life when you don't allow something that is a natural part of us as human beings to just be, to run its course, to send us the message, the learning that we also need from what has happened. And so for many, many years, I was this strong person, outwardly strong. But inside, I was drained. I was tired. I was lost. I felt like I was falling. The stronger I appeared, the more I fell into what felt like a dark dungeon. And it took a long while before I understood it. I met a wonderful coach who we had a chat just like you and I did, Joe. And it was just so interesting because he said, wow, you look like you've got a lot of things stored up. And I was like, what do you mean I've got a lot of things stored up? But whatever he did, he said, let's have a session. And I burst into tears for the first time. So crying 4 years after my mom died for the first time. For the loss of her in my life.
Let's pause there for a second. That's just really powerful. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. How you have a particular conversation with a coach or someone, and all of a sudden it's like the walls drop and it exposes this other level. And I think what I also connected with just a minute ago was the conditioning that was on you and your mind about how you had to be strong on the outside, but you weren't. So there's this friction underneath.
Friction.
So yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful.
Yeah. And that friction, it does leave you feeling so drained, as if you've got multiple personalities, but you just always embody the one that makes you look good, that makes everybody think, oh, she functions well. It felt like a bleeding heart within, though. So having these sessions with my coach back then was it was a game changer, because what happened was that I realized that I had the right to feel all those emotions, and that it wasn't bad. It wouldn't have made me weak. It wasn't going to make my person be less. I wasn't going to be loved less or whatever. And that was the moment that I knew emotions was my direction. And it went from there, emotions, and I understood what it meant for your personal development and for life coaching. So I trained in these things, and I went all the way. And one day, when I understood emotions, and then I understood emotional intelligence, and I got trained and certified in that, it just made sense to understand what drives all of that. And there came neuroscience coaching and leadership development training. I added that on. I had the joy of then working with John Mattone, who worked with Steve Jobs for about a year and a half or so and coached him. And I said, I want to learn executive coaching, because you've got humans at different levels who may also have experienced the exact same thing. How do you be fully and thrive from within when pieces of yourself are not, put together?
Very interesting, and sort of at that level, coaching someone at that level, I can relate to that, having spent a number of years senior level technical management. There's those two levels you talked about, sort of that what's really going on underneath, under the waterline, so to speak. And then there's what your external persona is, what you've been conditioned is right or good or the way you should be by well-meaning people, but still it's conditioning, and there's that tension that goes on. But I also find that leaders, managers, they have this extra hard shell. They have this extra level of protection because they can't. It's almost like another general conditioning in the culture that says you can't expose your real self. And in fact, how many times have I been in meetings? I don't know if you've been in these kind of meetings, but internal to a company where people say, oh, don't give me that soft and fluffy HR stuff, just even going any coded language around emotion, it in the past that has been seen as something that it was not appropriate for a senior leader to even have a discussion about. So very interesting dealing with those kinds of people and the struggles they have, because it's multiple tiered, I think. You have the conditioning that comes from your family, your loved ones, but you also have the conditioning that comes from the industry you're in and sort of the culture broadly.
Yes. And I think that it's very exciting to see the possibilities and the opportunities that open to a person you end up working with when you take that into consideration, and when you sort of address this beautiful organ.
There it is.
Right? I like it. Right? When we address this and we understand the relevance, it's not a trend. actually, we breathe, we digest, we heal, we think, and the brain is involved in that. But also, what sometimes is people close up to that is the fact that when you make decisions, when you suggest something, when you have to make negotiate with other people, you are a brain communicating with another one. And topmost for the brain is safety, thrive,
Yes.
by all means
Right.
possible. By all means possible. So this brain is listening to something, looking at something, hearing something, all the senses through which input comes in. And then the brain goes, can I eat you? Then I will survive. That's fantastic. Can I reproduce with you? I can survive. That's great. Do you, give me pleasure? Great. And everything that doesn't fall within that on the spot means danger, threat, danger, threat.
Yeah, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, we're predisposed for those lower brain kind of, that's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a sense. But
Exactly.
I think we forget about that. Most people's conversations, you never think about that. You only, maybe you're going on a diet or you're trying to fast and you feel hungry and you start to get in touch with how powerful your body can react, or you have a near-death experience, or you're in a car accident, and all kinds. You feel what your body does, or how you respond to danger,
Yes.
and how potent that is. But you don't typically think about that in terms of your normal processing what's going on. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's, and it's interesting too, because most, I would say a lot of coaching, a lot of it touches on, I would say, mental models and frameworks, ways of thinking. But this is a real deep dive into the physical aspects. And I wanted to sort of take a minute, if you're okay with that, and unpack the physical changes that can happen to brain structure by repeated conditioning and those sorts of things.
People talk about habits, changing habits, and I like the fact that you talked about pathways. What does that mean? I mean, think of it, if you walk along a field and everybody treads, you can see where people walk and the grass stops growing on that path. And that's literally what is happening with a habit. Okay, if you continue to tread on it, nothing will grow. That's the path everybody will take. If you decide to take another path, then that's going to be the beginning of a new path. But you need to walk on it just as often. And then literally you stop walking on the other one, and that's the new habit. That is what is happening. And the understanding of the parts of the brain. Why is it that when somebody is rejected or feels rejected, that it really feels like you're being physically attacked? Because the chemicals, the brain chemicals that we have, they are strong. We should not underestimate a brain based in cortisol non-stop. That is serious business. And it affects everything. It impacts your performance. It impacts your ability to think, to distinguish, to make resourceful choices. And knowing that, because I meet people who say stress, I need stress to get things done. Well, there is, if you talk about eustress, positive stress, wonderful. But over a period of time, the brain areas shut down. The prefrontal cortex shuts down. And when it does that, then all the limbic system, the emotional brain, starts to try to figure out what's going on. And you've got the amygdala, which I like to refer to as the inner mind chihuahua. It's going danger, threat, danger, threat, danger, threat, danger, threat, right? Because it notices there's an error and it cannot figure out what can it do. the PFC has shut down. It's not the job of the limbic system to think. It only provides the insights with which we can intentionally choose from. And then the primal brain sets in and you become reactive.
Wow. So let's take a minute, since the focus of this podcast is really on transition, and let's play around with some scenarios here. Maybe you can apply this a little bit. So we often think about transitions that we might anticipate and want to make on our own. Let's take that a little bit later. Certainly in the last year or so, with pandemic and other things that have been happening, there has been transitions forced upon a lot of people. People have lost their jobs. They have lost their community and connection. So in that kind of scenario, someone's being told they lost their job or lost a loved one. How does that play out with the brain and physically? I mean, obviously, we're talking limbic system here, I think.
We're talking limbic system. We are talking also about, I like to make it tangible to say, what is happening. Now, what happens in life happens. When you lose someone, when you have to look for a new job, when you get bad news, definitely you feel. And when you feel, you think. And when you think, something happens. And this is the moment of, do I fall into the space of reaction or do I fall into the space of responding? Nothing changes to what you have experienced. The what happened, that is fixed. It is what we do from that point onwards. So here's the question of resilience. Here's the question of courage. All things that we need to activate. And depending on if you've got a sense of, this is terrible, this is the end of the world, nothing is going to ever be better, then literally you are in a phase where I would say you don't see opportunities. And the limbic system, I like to think of the brain, if you think of that as the PFC, that's the primal brain, and then this is the limbic system, and here you've got the amygdala, Mr. Inner Mind Chihuahua, and you cover it. I mean, look at where it's positioned, but also everything here is where you have your insights, where you can draw from, where you can be creative, where you can get ideas. And if you are on alert, if the smoke detector is on, it is absolutely impossible for you to avoid what happens next, which is the fear circuits are set on. Your brain is releasing cortisol and what other inhibiting brain chemicals, and you are just reactive.
What kind of tactics do you give your people you coach, your coachees, if you will, to bump them out of that panic mode that they're stuck into when they're in the middle of that kind of intense situation, so that they can make more upper brain, I'll call it.
Because
those, I think you touched on soundtracks. Those panic soundtracks, in movies, you have these horrible, soundtracks that they're driving that kind of brain chemical. How do they bump themselves out of that?
It starts with two things that I like to put out to clients when I work with them here. Is one, the dinosaur. You see that movie you talked about, that doom, doom, doom. The dinosaur that you think is going on there is a lizard. The dinosaur is a lizard. No matter what has happened, we need to remember that, because the reality is of what threatens us today is not a big dinosaur, right? It could be, yes, change your job. It could be, should I ask for that promotion? Should I ask for that rise? How am I going to feed my children alone now that I have lost my spouse? That's the challenge we deal with today. The next thing is awareness of what is happening? Most of the time we are hustling, and we never take the time to just stop and actually just sense with compassion, no evaluation and no judgment. What is happening right now? What happened and what is happening here with me right now? And then do the breathing. Breathe, because what happens is that if you don't breathe, if you start seeing the dinosaur getting larger, your brain is not getting enough oxygen. And when the brain doesn't have oxygen, that means you're not breathing, and the brain needs oxygen and glucose to function. And you do not want Mr. Amygdala to switch it all on, because what happens is that then the PFC shuts down. Not completely, but indeed, now you're in survival mode. You're not thriving. You're not being able to access what you have. This is a supermarket. Think of the limbic system is a supermarket. But to access the resources, the potential, the capacity, you need to be calm. You cannot do that in survival mode.
A couple of things I just want to go back to. I like how you were talking about understand what's really happening. I'm emphasizing really because I think that might have been your intent, because when you're in the middle of that panic mode, the brain, I mean, just because of the survival wiring that we have, it amplifies the potential danger. So we're sort of swimming against the current there. So kind of reminding people, okay, what is really going on? What really is going on with the situation? And the other practical thing I really liked there was breathing, controlling your breath. That's so huge. Trying to calm ourselves down. I think that's part of what they do when people are in panic attacks is try to get them. And what is your breathing?
Yes.
The other thing that's interesting, breathing is part of, I think it's part of autonomic systems too, which is again lower brain function. We have some control over it, but you can't stop breathing for very long. So by setting the rhythm of your breathing, it's kind of setting the base level of cortisol. It's the base level of response and panic that you have. I love that.
It's also important to be aware of what breathing we're talking about, because if your fear circuits are switched on and now you're in the mode, you can also use this awareness too, right? The more you practice it, the more you practice not even reaching that point, the better it is. But if you do get to that point, you also need to be clear about what breathing. I told someone to breathe the other day and she went, I said, what do you think Mr. Amygdala is thinking? You're just telling him there's danger ahead. So you need to be really quite clear on how are you breathing. And of course, there are a lot of great, powerful ways you can breathe to really get to be intentional, to get the result that you want. Sometimes you need to get out of that fierce, the fight, the flight, the reactiveness, to then get to a point where you have access to your supermarket of resources, and then you can start making choices, because now your PFC is back on its seat. It's the CEO of the brain, executive functions. That's where it takes place, and that's where we need to be. So whether it is negotiation at work, whether it is a merger ahead and you're talking to tough negotiators, or yes, you've lost your job and all you see is, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? How am I going to do that? But when you can reach a point where you say, this has happened and I don't feel happy about it, but you don't enter that fear zone where you get totally paralyzed, then you're able to take even the tiniest step.
Great stuff. Okay, let's chase this scenario a little further. So let's say the person's moved past that initial period of transition. Things have settled out. Now they're beginning to think about, I have an opportunity here to think about, what do I want to do? Now, again, we circle back to some of the opening comments you made that we talked about in terms of conditioning. Who am I really? What do I really want? Um, what do I think I have to do? So that process is starting to move up the brain, starting to think about it. And imagine with your coaching, you're trying to expose, unpack, like your coach did. Let's see what's really going on in there. Unpack the thinking and the mindset.
Yes.
So for people who are in that phase of transition, who are thinking about possibilities, maybe they're kind of one foot in the world of I want to do more, but I don't know what I want to do or what I should do. How does that work out with your coachees?
This is where the neuro agility comes in. The neuro agility profile. What I never understood back in the days when I just, years ago, like 15 years ago when I started life coaching, where I would have a client and yes, I felt trained, I had done what I had done, but there was guesswork. I never, sometimes, the client will tell you what he feels, but I was guessing. And then I came across the neuroagility profile, the brain, the neuroscience, the brain coaching, understanding what is going there, understanding that the brain has these 5 losses, right? Everything falls under that. And if it does, you become reactive. So loss of finance, loss of safety, loss of status, loss of security, and loss of connection and belonging. So every time this brain is talking to another brain, the input coming in there, coming in through the eyes, coming in through the nose, that's what it's looking at. New manager is coming on. Does that mean I'm going to lose my status? They're bringing a new computer system. Uh-oh. Will I be able to use that? I like my comfort zone. I don't want to use that, right? Loss of security. Okay. My boss told me they may be putting me in a new team. Loss of connection and belonging. This is how the brain is processing all of that. And so when you want to make a new decision, it processes that. What will I lose if I go ahead? What will I gain if I do? And then your confidence needs to set up. So the question is, how can you be confident when you don't even know what it is you bring to the table? And I mean accurately. That's what I loved about the neuroagility profile. The accuracy of really just knowing, how am I wired? Do I have a left brain hemisphere preference or a right brain? People always say I'm left brain. No, we are not only left brain. Because if not, we wouldn't be able to swim, walk up the stairs. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We have a dominance. We have a preference, especially in new situations, in stressful situations. Your dominant brain hemisphere takes over. That's all happened because the brain likes to preserve energy. And so you need to know, how do you learn? How do you process information? How do you communicate? How do you take in input? What is your risk for human error? With the neuroagility profile, you get this information and you know, oh my goodness, let's take the right ear or the left ear, right? This part of your body is controlled by your right brain hemisphere. So this ear doesn't listen for what, it listens for how, because that's what that part of your brain does. And you need to understand that. And this brain listens for what? Language. What was said? This is how was it said? Emotions. Why is this kind of information important? Why is it important, Joe, for somebody to know what are my intelligence preferences? Because you can't have job satisfaction if you're not doing something you're actually good at. And what is the best thing you can do when you actually use what you're good at in what you want to do as a career?
It's
That's
interesting. I have to
amazing.
stop you there
It's
because I think
amazing.
you talked about comfort zone too. So it's interesting. We tying some of these things together. An individual may be conditioned to think that they should go into a certain career, right? By their family or by what they've seen and what they think they should do. Now, and they may go ahead and go into that career and be okay, successful, fairly successful with it. I'll use a personal example. I went into school and majored in chemistry, got a degree in chemistry. I was a chemist for 9 years, analyzing pharmaceuticals for release and in the production of pharmaceuticals, developing test methods. I was good at it, but that wasn't, to use today's term, that wasn't my superpower. I found that I moved forward and started automating laboratories, and that's how I got into information technology. And I spent the rest of my career, having recently retired, leading IT in pharmaceutical, biotech, life science companies. So even that, was it being in IT, was that what I was really good at? Well, I was pretty good at it, but I was really more of a change type person. And then midway through the process, like you, I had a challenging situation and I engaged a coach, and that's where I got in touch with, I really love working with people. But I spent the majority of my career indirectly doing that. Was important. Yeah. So when people go through transitions, when I coach people, I kind of zero in on that. What's the disconnect? I look for dissonance between what they're currently how do they have joy in what they're doing, or what they think they're going to do does it drain their energy? This might get back to some of your specialty. Do they feel like they're exhausted all the time? They might even have a pretty good level of success in life and in their career. Have they been exhausted for 30 years?
Yes.
Maybe they should rethink this.
Yes, and can you do more? Yeah, and can you do? I mean, we've got so much potential. At the moment, we're using less than 10% of our brain potential, and you can be good at something. But just imagine if you had that much, but you increase it by 1%. Can you imagine what is possible? And you can do more and you can do better than just being good at something and getting by. In the millennia of the mind in which we are now, nobody thrives if you are just getting by and not using your potential to a greater extent. That is so key, and that's where the brain comes in play. And when you understand how you are wired and you understand where your gaps are. I love the gaps, Joe. Why? Because the gaps are the space for everything you can enhance, everything you can optimize, everything that you can transform long term.
This is fun. I'm having fun with this conversation. I don't usually get into this kind of stuff with everybody, but I find it fascinating. And just kind of circling back a little bit, you talk about the gaps, and I do believe people can grow. Now, don't get me wrong, but a strategy that I employed that actually was very helpful to me was to focus on my strengths. I think Marcus Buckingham, in a Strength Finder, and I really agree with that. I think that there is a prevailing paradigm out there in management, in particular, that you need to try to get your team to improve in their weaknesses, and there's a tendency to focus all your energy on your weaknesses, and by doing that, you're going to make the person's overall performance that much better. They're going to be more successful, but in particular, when I went into leadership roles, I hit a wall where I realized I was pretty bad at certain things. And there were people on my team that happened to be good at them. And I was successful overall. The team was much more successful overall when I went, can you do this? Can you take the lead here? It was a hard thing to do. And that provided me with more space to double down in areas where I was strong. So I do think, yeah, absolutely, you can improve, and maybe you meant something a little different with the gaps, but I think sometimes we do a disservice to people that we lead and we work with by focusing too much on things that may not be an area that they're gifted in. Can they improve? Absolutely, but is that the best strategy?
Yeah, and what purpose does that serve? I mean, let's take it. When I was a child, I come from a family of people who love numbers. Okay.
All right. So let's stop here a second. You don't have sort of the normal accent. Where do you come from? Let's take a minute.
My parents are Nigerian. I was born in Wales.
I love it.
Yes, I was born in Newport, Wales, Gwent. I schooled in London for a while. My parents moved to Germany, and then at some point my parents went back to Nigeria. And the Nigerian parents that they were, that generation, what they did was that they would send their children to Europe or the States to study, get a good education. And that's how I landed back in Europe.
And you're in Luxembourg, right?
Today I'm in Luxembourg, the heart of Europe.
There you go.
And close to everything.
All right. Thank you for doing that. We should have done that up front.
Yeah. So when I came, coming from a family where everyone is an accountant, okay, I grew up with a lot of shame because I was not good at numbers. I was afraid, terrified. I couldn't do anything with them. I didn't have the skill. But what do you do when your cousin chooses to study mechanical engineering? The other one wants to become a doctor. The other one wants to become a physician. Everything has to do with numbers. I was bad at numbers. I grew up in fear of just being found out how bad I was. So I grew up just always doing enough that nobody sees and notices the truth.
Yeah.
Now I never asked my dad if, do you think I'm good at math? But I got by. But not because I knew and not because I loved it. It was just not to be caught out and not to experience the shame of being bad at this kind of thing. But I was very good at boosting people on. The athletes, when they ran, I was the one you can do this, be strong. I could always do that. But when you're a young person, people don't tell you that is actually a skill you can use in a career. Today I know. So you've got 11 intelligences. It's not only the traditional intelligence, math, verbal, there are more. You've got musical, you've got intrapersonal, you've got interpersonal, bodily, kinesthetic, spiritual. There is so much. And then I realized, now I know why. When I look at my mathematical intelligence, there is the gap. Okay? I always say that the gap, according to the Neuro agility profile, is that the gap is not a bad thing. The gap is just saying, look at all the potential you have there for you to enhance, to improve yourself. So if you are doing a job that requires if you're an accountant, logically, we would expect you to have quite a relatively high score.
Right.
But I'm not an accountant. I'm a coach. I work with people. So if I don't have a high interpersonal or intrapersonal, I would need to work on that. If not, it will defeat the whole purpose.
And I guess that's what I'm saying is I absolutely agree with that. But we often speak to people who are struggling because they're trying to work. Their primary focus is their gap area.
Yes.
They have been conditioned, or they have a belief, or they have a soundtrack that is telling them that's where they need to be. And so,
That's where they need to be.
and I think we talked a little bit earlier, you said, what's the reality here? So the reality is that's not your profile. So maybe step back and think about where you're strong and move in that direction.
Yes,
And that's
absolutely.
hard. It's hard to change that kind of mindset, but it makes such a huge difference. My goodness.
Well, it does, Joe. I mean, when I realized that I had, if you've got 0 to 100% and your intrapersonal and your interpersonal score, it's not about the score, because that's also very important to highlight. It's not like, oh, I've got high scores, low scores, because the neuro agility profile, it's not a psychometric one. It really is about it's about unleashing your potential. So whether you have 40 and then you see a gap from 40 to 100,
All right.
we're going to check, is that a skill you need now? Is that something you need to enhance now? So that gap, if that is the skill you need to enhance, then maybe you should work on that. And if it's not, you can focus on the ones where you have a higher score.
Okay,
because
so that
those
clarifies
ones-
it for me. So the gap is really
Yes.
the potential gap.
The potential.
Okay, that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Because of me in certain areas,
Yeah.
there's not much there and there's not much of a gap either.
Yeah, absolutely. Good that we got that clear, because it's important. Yes, like you said, you can work on your weakness, but my weakness is mathematics, numbers. Okay. Now I don't need it really now. I do my little mathematical games just to enhance it a bit, but I don't need to work on that particular thing. I want to be able to do public speaking, so I work on my verbal skills. That makes sense. And that is what people should do. But how do you know it? When you need to also know, what role do you play? Let's take the brain. If we go from there, that being the front, you've got the two hemispheres, but you've got quadrants. And isn't it interesting to know that on the left side, the quadrant here at the back is the doer. And the one in the front on the left side is the analyst. That's the role you play. So when you're in a team, like you said earlier, there were people who could do things that you were not necessarily good at, but you could double down when you had people helping you to do the things you were not good at. The back part is the counselor, and the front part is the strategist. So everybody has a role. And isn't it interesting to know that it doesn't help if you're a doer and you're talking to a counselor, like they are doers. There is a way, and you see how this helps in communication.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
How do you communicate with people? I'm not an analyst. So if you are speaking to me, and I mean, how do we meet? How do we enable inclusion?
Yeah,
That's why I love the brain.
That's why I like mirroring,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
in your style, understanding the interactional style,
Yes.
To be able to have the knowledge of knowing what your style is, but also the knowledge of the person you're communicating with, and to mirror their style as best you can,
Yes.
so that they hear you.
Yes, and that you listen, and that you don't, many times we people are always already listening and already knowing in communication, which means that if you have already listened before what has been said, and if you already know, then that means you are not actively listening. Yes, it's going in, it's flying out.
I think sometimes conversations, and we hear that a lot, and I think sometimes we don't really appreciate it fully, but we get into our own sort of tapes on a particular topic. We enter into a conversation, ding, that topic comes up. We push play on our I used to say tape players. We push play, and out comes that thing that we have said many, many times before. We're not communicating, we're changing
Not
stations.
And not based on what we're listening to. So
right.
This is just so vital in change and transition. as you said, there is so much to it. And I had a conversation with senior manager recently, and he's like, "Yeah, can we work 2 weeks?" And I'm like, even if we did an intensive
He wanted a 2-week engagement to
2 week
unpack an entire life
what exactly do you want to achieve
yeah.
in this time? I step back from that because it takes us a lifetime to become who we have become. And there's nothing bad about it. I love to start with compassion, no judgment and evaluation. And that in itself is so demanding because we're not used to that. We're conditioned to question, to create drama, to overthink, to label everything, to try to change something. I believe in transformation, not changing. I think an orange is an orange, and no matter how you dress it, it will always remain an orange.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit more about that. That sounds like it's interesting to unpack.
Yeah, because people like to change and fix. And in my work, I like to say, you are absolutely okay the way you are, because the way you are is the way you have wound up becoming, due to where you've grown up, how you've been educated, your experience. There is nothing wrong with that. We cannot go ahead into the future thinking, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, because what are the criteria by which you're measuring all of that? But when you transform, it is being able to identify what you truly bring to the table, and to understand from an emotional agility point, there are things that have served their purpose. When I cried when my mom died 4 years later, that drain, that bleeding heart I felt, I could release it. It served its purpose. And to transform, that is what we need to realize. We need to let go of the things that have served their purpose. You don't need to change anything, because what happened, happened.
Yeah. Yeah. That was very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. So let me ask this question. I like to do this as we sort of kind of bring the plane in for a landing a little bit here, get closer toward the end. And that is, what advice, knowing what you know now, you know where I'm going with this, would you give to your 20-something-year-old self or your young adult self, to have a more productive, have a more successful life, to show up who they are, to be the real orange they are? Now, I know you meant orange in terms of formation, to become an orange, but I have this belief, and let's just put it on the table, that we're all gifted in a certain unique way. And ultimately, our fulfillment in life, our joy we have in life, and our success in life will be rooted to us showing up in the world, visualize a gift, being unwrapped for the benefit of not only yourself, but the world, for other people. If that doesn't happen, if the gift is tucked away in the closet and we're doing other things, we're not going to be experiencing the joy in our life, and we're not going to be fulfilling our purpose. That's my belief. So with that stated as a backdrop on what I'm asking is, what advice do you give? What advice would you go back and give yourself or someone else?
My grandmother always said, wherever you go, whatever time, when you take a moment to stand still, you need to remember. Because as we hustle through life, we become these different pieces, right? You are the piece. You're the version of you when you're at work. You're the version of you when you're managing people. You're the version of you when you're with your same level colleagues. You're a person when you're with your friends. You're a version of you when you're with your family. You're a version of you in these. So these are all pieces of you, but they all belong to you. And you need to embrace all pieces. Just like when you have a lasagna, You've got the pasta, you've got the bechamel sauce, you've got the ground beef and whatever else you put in there. Now, for that experience that you have when you take a piece of it and you put it in your mouth and you chew it and it all mingles well together, it belongs together. You cannot say the pasta is more important than the ground beef. And that means I would tell my younger self that you are not broken because you've lost something. You're not broken. That part is also part of you. And every part of you makes you the stronger version that you can become when you're an adult in the world where you are expected to just be on. Another thing I would say is you don't have to be on all the time. And I'm not saying that from the point of, people who go on this kind of a social media detox or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say you don't need to be on, you're human. And just like a river is not always, it's not always like windy and stormy. There's a time of calm so that it can cleanse and get rid of the dirt and whatever. It's the same thing that goes for humans. We need to understand that we cannot remember everything that belongs to us if we don't take the time to stop, because that's what humans do. Everything in the system needs to pause. When you run a marathon and you stop running, you notice that you need to, it takes a while, but then you change, your way of breathing changes, because that's just life. And the weather is sometimes sunny, sometimes it's stormy, sometimes it's windy, but it's just doing all the things that make it complete, the weather. Same thing for humans. If I had known back then that you also have to admit another thing. People talk about comfort zone. Honestly speaking, Joe, I don't talk about comfort zone. Let me be quite honest to you. When I was in what people refer to as a comfort zone, it was a pain zone for me. Everything that I did not want was in there with me, in my pain zone. And everything that could allow me to breathe, thrive, relate well with people, ask for help was outside that zone. And it was only when I fell sick, found myself unable to walk for 2 months, knew that I lived alone and I needed help. That's when I learned you're not an island. We exist we are human beings, but we are only human beings by being with other humans. That was a mighty lesson. There were so many times in my 20s when I felt I have to do everything alone. You can't ask people, because that's going to be very shameful. All of that drama. We put so much meaning. We are meaning creating people. But that is exactly the reason why we struggle in literally every single thing. Because when everything is meaningless, it's beautiful. Because when everything is meaningless, that means there is no meaning and you can create what you want. Drama free.
Drama free.
Yeah, drama free. That's what I would tell my 20-year-old version of me. Yeah.
I love that. So listen, hey, we're wrapping up, but before we finish, I wanted to give you a little bit of time to talk about kind of what your current projects are and what your current focus is in your business.
Yes. So, like I have mentioned a number of times, I am the original corporate partner of Neurolink. That is the creator of the Neuro Agility Profile Assessment, the 12 competencies, emotional intelligence assessment, the High Achiever program. So we are doing a lot of bringing that awareness of creating a brain-friendly world where we start with the brain. accurate awareness. That's what the neuro agility is about. And we are bringing that into companies. We're bringing that also for people like you and me who impact others, to remove the guesswork, not trying to figure out what could be this person's um, point of departure on his journey or her journey to enhancing, but that they actually have accurate self-awareness. And then other things that I also focus on are my emotional mastery 12-week masterclass, where I teach people to be whole human beings that embrace themselves with compassion, and they just thrive without all the drama, without all the codes from the past of what you should, could, would, but, if, and all of that. And how to just be people who can function, be future ready today from within with your emotions, because you're human. And remember. So that's literally what my focus of work is.
And what's the best way for people to reach you?
So you can reach me on www.Omozua, which is my name, omozua.com, or www.systemicneuroscience.com. And also just contact me on LinkedIn. There you would find me, where I share a lot of insights and thoughts. And I'd love to start a dialogue with anybody who is interested in learning more about peak performance, your productivity, and thriving from within and living a life that is yours.
Well, I will put those links in the show notes. This podcast goes out obviously on the YouTube channel for those watching, and also it's available where all audio podcast apps can be found. And so I'll put those links in those notes, and they'll be on the end card on the YouTube video as well. So once again, it's been delightful to talk to you. I think it's been a lot of fun for me because these are interest areas for me, but I know that you definitely have dropped some nuggets here for those who have found this episode through their searching on their journey. And just once again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information. Also, please like and subscribe to this channel.